Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
On July 16th, 2008, 911 dispatchers would get a very distressed Cindy Anthony calling to report that their granddaughter had been missing for 31 days. Even worse, not only would they say that their granddaughter had been missing for 31 days, but their actual daughter's car, the trunk of it, smelt like an unalive body. And what the police would uncover in this investigation would turn the world completely upside down with rage. And very quickly, a 22-year-old woman would become the most hated woman in the entire world. Kaylee Anthony would be born in Warren, Ohio on March 19, 1986. She would be born to both parents, George and Cindy Anthony, and would also have an older brother named Lee Anthony. They would not stay in Warren, Ohio very long and would eventually relocate to Orlando, Florida. Kaylee would have a fairly normal childhood and would be described as a very artistic and energetic child. But it's at some point that she started picking up a habit of lying. Not only would she have a habit of lying, but she would also have a really bad habit of being very evasive for the truth. For example, when Kaylee Anthony was getting ready to graduate, her parents wanted to throw her a graduation party. So they would contact all of her living relatives and let Kaylee know that all your relatives are going to be showing up for your graduation. And Kaylee would play it off as if everything was perfectly fine and she was going to be going to graduation. But her parents would not hear anything about a date for the graduation. They would constantly ask Kaylee, when is your graduation going to be at? Because your family's going to be here and everyone wants to know where it's going to be at. To which Kaylee would be very evasive. Eventually, Cindy Anthony would actually call the school and ask when the graduation was. And to her surprise, the school would tell her that Kaylee Anthony would not be graduating, and would inform her that not only had she missed too many days, but she was also failing all of her classes, so therefore she would not be graduating. Even more surprising, once Cindy Anthony would hear this, she would not even inform the rest of the family about this. So the family would actually come to this graduation and they would actually go to this school to watch Kaylee Anthony not graduate. Even the family would even ask, why is Kaylee not in a gown? Why isn't she walking on stage to graduate? To which Cindy Anthony would just play it off. That's how Kaylee Anthony wanted to do it. Another example of Kaylee's evasiveness would actually involve the reason of this story, and that would be her daughter, Kaylee Anthony. Now, Kaylee was born on August 9th, 2005. And being that Kaylee was only 22 years old, it's very apparent that she probably did not plan Kaylee Anthony. In fact, when she would first become pregnant, she would actually tell high school friend that she had no plans of keeping the baby, and would say that after she had the baby, she would give it up for adoption. And this would be her plan for most of the pregnancy. And she would not tell George or Cindy Anthony about being pregnant until she was about 7 or 8 months pregnant. Now, leading up to this, she had been wearing baggy clothes as she was a very small-figured woman. But around the time that she was reaching the 7th or 8th month mark, she was starting to show signs that she was obviously pregnant. And when Kaylee would finally tell her parents that she was pregnant, she would just play it off as, oh, by the way, I'm 7 or 8 months pregnant and I'm going to give it up for adoption. George and Cindy Anthony would be completely against this and would forbade Kaylee Anthony to give the child up for adoption. But they would also be very secretive about this pregnancy and would not tell anyone in the family. Not even their own son, Lee Anthony, who lived with them. And even further, when Kaylee Anthony would give birth to Kaylee Anthony, they wouldn't even invite him to the hospital. Which is said by several reports that this incident would cause a friction within the home. And it's said that after this incident, Anthony's relationship with Kaylee would be completely changed to the point that they wouldn't even be on speaking terms. Now, when Kaylee Anthony would give birth to her daughter Kaylee, her parents again would ask her, who's the father of Kaylee? And at first at the time, she would tell her parents that it was her boyfriend Ryan Brown, but would quickly change her story and tell Ryan that he was not the father of the baby. So her parents would ask, well, if Ryan's not the father, who is the father? And Casey would tell them that the father is no longer alive at this point in time, and would say that she had met a guy at a party and that they would get together. And shortly after the fact, he would be unalived by a car wreck, but would not give details on who he was. Now, our story begins on June 16th, 2008, where Casey would tell both her parents, George and Cindy, that she would be going on a business trip and that she would be taking her daughter, Kaylee, with her, who was 3 years old at the time. And of course, her parents would ask Casey, well, who's going to be watching Kaylee while you're on this business trip? And she would tell them that she had a babysitter or a nanny. And they would ask who the nanny was, and she would say Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. And Cindy would ask, where did you meet Zenaida? And Casey would tell them that she had met Zenaida through a co-worker at work. And Casey would walk out the door, and they would not see Casey again for another 31 days. It should also be noted that Ryan would actually break up with Casey long by this point. He essentially would say that there were just way too many problems, and he decided to break it off with Casey. And knowing that he was not the father of Kaylee, he was just better off going and just parting ways. And around the time that Casey would be taking this trip, she would actually be dating a DJ. And the entire 31 days that she was gone from her parents' house, she would not be on this business trip, but she would be at her boyfriend's house partying every single night. And this particular boyfriend would say that when she showed up to his apartment, Kaylee was nowhere to be found. And being that he was a DJ, they would have these parties at his apartment every single night. And Cindy would constantly call and ask Casey where their granddaughter was, to where she would say, oh, she's with the nanny. So while Cindy Anthony was stressing out where their granddaughter was, Casey was living her best life with this boyfriend, going to party after party after party. On this particular party, she was doing a body contest with several friends of hers. And after these pictures would be taken, she would post them all over social media. And to be completely honest, Casey was the only one who knew where her daughter was, because her boyfriend had no idea where Kaylee was, just like Cindy Anthony had no idea where she was. Casey would even go out and get a tattoo on her back that would say Bella Vita, or It's a Beautiful Life. Eventually, Cindy Anthony would have enough, and by July 16th, 2008, she would decide to go over to her boyfriend's house and ask him some questions. And being that he was a DJ, there was a lot of paraphernalia at his apartment. So you can imagine Cindy Anthony's rage when she would go into this apartment and basically find her daughter hanging out with paraphernalia all over the table. And she would actually drag Casey Anthony out of that apartment and take her home, which would spark a heated argument inside the car, because Casey was more worried that she embarrassed her in front of her boyfriend than where her daughter was. Now, it's around this time that George Anthony would get a phone call from an unlikely source. And it would actually be a local impound lot calling George Anthony to let him know that they had his car in the impound lot and it had actually been towed. Recognizing that it was the car that he had given his daughter Casey so she could go to and from work, or to drop her daughter Kaylee off at a nanny. And when George had asked what happened to the car and why it was impounded, they would tell him that someone had abandoned the car. So he would quickly go over to go retrieve the car, but paying the pound lot would be the least of his worries.